help me welcoming Sue Kroeger.
Okay. Well, this is so fun to be here, and especially because I've been coming to the salons for a while, thanks to my friend Stephanie here. And wow, the speakers are usually really dynamic. So I'm hoping that you don't leave here tonight and go, oh my goodness, my last salon. Anyway, I really appreciate the invitation. As Joanna mentioned, I think I'm her client, but we're also friends. And I really appreciate them wanting to have this topic on the agenda, because it's not a topic that always gets on the agenda. So I really appreciate that opportunity. So thanks for coming. I also wanted to reiterate that I hope you'll feel free to ask questions, and I hope you'll also feel free to say, yikes. What did you just say? And I need clarification on that. I was talking to Stephanie before, and sometimes I can get a bit irreverent and provocative, and then I lose my audience. So I want you all to feel free to say, whoa, that's too weird. So can we straighten that out a little bit? So please interrupt me if I've said something that causes angst, okay? This title I have, I'm not really, I know other speakers have talked a little bit about themselves, so I thought I would open with a little bit, just so you might know kind of what I'm about. And I have this title, What Happened to You, as sort of a tagline, as a way to segue into sharing a little bit of my story. And I want you to know that at 68 years old, that's how old I am, at 68 years old, this question still comes to me often. Well, I should be not too dramatic here, but it happens on occasion where I get this question. And it can still evoke really strong emotions from me. I can get, well, I'll say angry rather than the other word, okay? I can get angry, I can feel sad, I might be embarrassed by the question, I might feel humiliated, and resentment. And how many times have I been asked this question? I mean hundreds of times, okay? So I don't want to be too dramatic, but hundreds of times in 68 years, people have just walked up to me and said, what happened to you? So I have to this day not been able to come up with a very good response, because it really kind of depends on my mood and the situation. When I was young, I would say a diseased fly bit me. And, or I would say, you know, I was born this way, or sometimes none of your business. Or I might say, nothing's wrong with me, what's wrong with you? Okay? And I want you to know that my parents did not appreciate these responses. Mostly now, I would say, as I have matured a little bit, I mostly meet that question still, though, with rolling eyes, silence, and moving away. So I do not respond well to that question. And we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, not so much about me, but about why that is problematic in our culture. Growing up in Iowa, my disability was pretty much ignored by everyone, okay, including myself. In hindsight, I believe we, especially my family, we all learned very early that this condition, this situation, only had two responses from society. Can you guess what those two responses might be? Huh? Pity Did somebody say pity? Yep, pity. And what might be the opposite of pity? No, but no. Opposite of pity. Inspiration, right? Okay. So you know where this is going, right? So I had two options, and I really have to say, I knew that at a very young age, that those were the two responses that I was going to get. And my family, I think, did too. And we chose the latter. We chose the inspirational, courageous, brave route. And sort of really moved away from, I'm sorry, I'm ignoring you guys over here, ignored the pity route. And to elicit those responses takes a lot of work, okay? It's not just a matter of being yourself. You have to really set it up to get somebody to go, wow, you're incredible, okay? So we all worked pretty hard, and I got a lot of that from my parents. So I did a lot of things. We were very creative in making modifications, okay, so that I could participate and be independent. So, for example, when I was growing up, I wore long, full-length braces, and I had those like crutches, you know. I still have them actually, but I don't use them as much anymore. I actually learned to jump rope. So my friends would swing the rope, and I had the timing down so that I could lift myself and get over that rope. My dad thought that if my friends were ice skating, I should ice skate. So he got his big old hockey skates out. We put them over my high-top white shoes that were connected to the braces, and then he put sandpaper on my crutches, and I ice skated with my friends, okay? Because I tried very hard to ride the bike, and after so many times of crashing, my dad said, "We're getting you a horse." So I had a horse growing up. I could saddle that horse myself. I hitched it up to a cart. I lived in a very small town in Iowa, and you oftentimes people would see, oh, that's Sue's horse, bridled to the parking meter downtown, right? So I took the horse just like people took bikes. One thing I did not do is I didn't clean up after him very well. So. But I played baseball using my crutch as a bat. I climbed the ladder at the pool and dove off the high board. And I raced go-karts because that's what everybody was doing. And I appreciate and value all those experiences, just like I'm sure you all do growing up, all of the things you did. So I don't want you to hear me say, yikes. It was wonderful, and I still tend to be pretty independent. I was cheerful. I really didn't whine or complain. I know, Cindy, I did not whine very much. I know. But growing up, I was pretty cheerful, and mostly I didn't want anyone or my family to be depressed or sad about this thing that I had, right? So I kind of didn't ever kind of succumb to whining. My mother wouldn't have let me do that anyway. My mother, this was a small German community in Iowa. You didn't whine. You were straight ahead. And if you did whine or complain, my mother had two responses. One was, think about something else, okay? And that really has kind of been good advice, I would say, over the years. When you start telling yourself funny stuff, think about something else. The other one that's never worked quite so well was take 2 aspirin and lay on your left side. And I have no idea where that came from. But I was cheerful. My parents were called saints. I would hear this, that they were saints for raising me normally. I heard a lot of statements constantly about, wow, Sue's really overcome her disability. And I I just don't think of Sue as disabled. So that was, again, a real result of working real hard to pass, to cover, okay? And I want you to know that that really is a bargain that disabled people make with society, is don't whine, don't complain, and try to be as normal as you can, because then we're going to be okay with you. We're going to feel comfortable, okay? So again, while I appreciate all of the wonderful things that came out of this experience, I realize that that effort of constantly trying to cover takes a real toll. Because our construct of normalcy in our society is very strong, and it's very pervasive. And the fear of not being liked or pitied because of one's biological condition, right, is really powerful. So it took me many years, I mean, I don't know how long, but it took me quite a while, to really kind of come to terms with valuing and embracing my difference, okay? And as I said, still at 68, I'll get these weird comments, and then it's like a trigger, right? Then I like fly off the handle. Anyway, but I really don't want to talk about me tonight, even though I may intersperse a few little nuggets now and then. Instead, I really want to share with you this notion of how disability gets represented, gets framed in our society, okay? And how this new discipline of disability studies, which I don't know, have any of you, are any of you familiar with the discipline disability studies? You are? Okay. It's relatively new. It's only been emerging probably over the last 30 or 40 years, which I know sounds like a long time, but it really isn't. And I want to introduce you to the power of this new discipline, and help you all to consider, at least, how we all have been socialized to think about disability in a certain way, and how we can think differently. There's an alternate view of that would be helpful. So does that sound okay if we do that? That doesn't sound too academic, does it? But I teach this at the university, and the last thing I want to do is give you a lecture, which is why I'm hoping you'll have questions. But my students, when I teach this, I don't teach this, but I teach disability studies, oftentimes tell me that I kind of get on a roll and I forget to shut up. So anyway. So here's an interesting quote from Bertrand Russell. He says, "In all affairs, it's a healthy thing now and then to hang a question mark on the thing you have long taken for granted." Okay? And I really think that's kind of what I'd like to do tonight, is to have us hang a question mark on how we think about, how we define, how we conceptualize disability, and really, even to a larger degree, difference, okay? Because it isn't just about disability. I'm wondering in this room how many of you either have a disability or have a close friend or family member with a disability. How many of you in this room? Or work with disabled people, okay? So quite a few, okay? And that really reinforces the notion of how pervasive and common and ordinary disability is, okay? But we have a tendency to other it, right? Somebody else. There are over 54 million Americans with disabilities, right? So that's 20% of the population. And when I say disability, please don't think I'm just talking about the good old wheelchair user, okay? Because I'm talking about sensory impairments, blindness, deafness, cognitive, right? Learning disabilities, autism, psychological impairments. and chronic health conditions. All of those can be disabling, okay? So when you hear me talk tonight, think big, okay? I know I'm always a great example, and I like to, There it is. Thanks, Ross. So I want us to, with this question mark, I would like you, I've already done this, so I want you to think about that what you have been taught about disability, right? Either from school or from your family or from your religion or from the media, which is probably the biggest teacher, isn't it? It's media. I want you to consider that that information is distorted, okay? That it's wrong sometimes, and at the least inaccurate, okay? And that if we really want to truly understand disability and disability experiences and identities, what do we need to do, right? And it's really what we need to do all the time anymore, especially with the news cycle, right? We have to examine what it is we think we know, okay? We have to be good, critical questioners. And without that, we will stay stuck, okay? So enter disability studies, and I'll just give you a quick and dirty about disability studies, okay? I think many people oftentimes are surprised to learn that disabled people have been engaged in social change for decades, right? Our disability rights movement doesn't oftentimes get the publicity that perhaps other social justice movements have, but there's a very active disability rights movement, right? We have the ADA, which grew out of that movement, the Gallaudet Uprising, Deaf President Now, transportation, getting people out of nursing homes, and access to public facilities. All of that is a result of a very strong disability rights movement. And disability studies is the academic counterpart to that social justice movement, okay? In some ways, you probably know this, it's similar to women and gender studies, right? And we all know that women and gender studies does not study women's reproductive organs, does it? That's not what that discipline is about, is it? No. And disability studies is not the study of impairments, okay? It doesn't look at that, well, I'm not saying it doesn't look at it at all, but that is not the focus of disability studies. It does not treat the individual impairment as a condition to be cured or corrected, okay? It's not an applied field, okay? So what disability studies is it explores all of that knowledge that represents some bodies as inferior, okay? It conceptualizes disability as discrimination, as oppression, rather than a medical condition. I don't know if that makes sense. But for example, I might be Sue with a mobility impairment, right? Because that's mine, I own that. But if I said I'm a disabled woman, which I do, and I use it as an adjective, which upsets some people, some of those people first people at the U, right? Those people first people. Anyway, I use it as an adjective because why? Anybody have a guess of why I might use disabled as an adjective to describe myself? I'm a disabled woman.
You're a woman. It's a stereotype of somebody else's choosing.
Pardon?
Because it's a stereotype of somebody else's.
But if disability is discrimination and oppression, according to disability studies, why would I say I'm a disabled woman? To own it, right? Right. Who said that? Yeah, right? So what I am saying is disability is something that is done to me, right? Who I am is just fine, right? But I am a disabled woman because I am disabled by, right? And a hostile environment, right? I don't want to be too crazy, but sometimes it can be hostile. Boy, we should open the curtains because there is a sunset out there. So whoever has access to the curtains, you might want to open them. And if you all want to take a minute to look, it's so pretty. So disability studies then explores all of this from the perspective of disabled people. So it is not medicine, it's not rehabilitation, it's not special education, it's not any applied field that is going to focus on cure, treatment, or remediation. Does that make sense? So, and that is not to say that special ed and rehabilitation aren't fine fields. It's just that that's not what this is. Just as gender and women's studies is not about, like I said, women's reproductive organs. So disability studies is really about trying to destigmatize disease, impairment, and really try to get people to see it as sort of an integral part of the human experience, right? This isn't something that's weird, that doesn't happen to very many people. It's fairly common. And if we don't have these discussions like this, the disabled person is always going to be what? We're always going to be the other, okay? And so how do we find a way that disabled people are not othered, okay? Disability studies also, and again, I'm going to kind of try to be brief here, but if you were taking a course, these would be concepts that you might look at, right? There's a whole bunch of them there. Disability frames, media, language, I can't see, stereotypes, stigma, charity, history, politics, design, independence. All of these different concepts would be interrogated through a disability studies lens. And I'll show you that tonight because we're going to touch on a few of these, like language. That's always a good one, isn't it? And design and normalcy, okay? But normalcy is the big one. That's the big elephant in the room, isn't it? That we're all working so hard to be normal, okay? And so disability studies is really trying to show how normal is enforced in our society, how it's imitated, how it's taught, how it's sold, right? And that all happens through media, politics, history, etc., right? And how that normal concept contributes to racist, sexist, and other forms of human diminishment, okay? That positions some humans where? Is on the margins. I did it again, didn't I? I think it's this bottom one. Anyway, sorry. Ross will never invite me. Well, you only get one shot at this anyway, don't you? Okay. So one of the most kind of core concepts in disability studies is to understand what is this dominant narrative in our society, right? In terms of how disability gets defined, how it gets conceptualized, how it gets represented, okay? And it's really important if we're going to think about, well, how could we think differently? We have to understand what's going on right now, right? And we have to appreciate not only how pervasive it is, but how we've all been socialized into this frame, okay? And that includes disabled people too, okay? All of us have been socialized into a certain way of thinking about disability and impairment. And when I teach at the university, it's really apparent to me how we don't have opportunities to really implement any critical thinking around disability, okay? And almost everything, so we'll have this, I hope, have a good conversation tonight, right? And I'll tell you some different ways to think, and you'll hopefully get real excited. But when you go out, nothing will reinforce it, nothing. So it's really hard to kind of hang on to this new thinking, which is why it's so important that we become critical thinkers, right? Critical questioners. So I'm just curious, when I say a frame, do you all know what I mean? Like if there's a, right? We frame everything, don't we? So think of what are some hot issue buttons right now that are framed? But what are some biggies? Think of a big one right now. Immigration. Oh my goodness, yes. So just as sort of a little example, and without, I mean, I want to be careful of my politics, although usually I'm not shy about letting people know where I fall on the continuum. But just think about it for a minute. Think about the different sides of immigration, right? What is some language that may be the right side of the fence? Whoops, that's right. What would be some words that the right side of the fence would use to describe?
Lazy.
Lazy?
Alien.
Alien, okay. Criminals? Did somebody say illegals? Yeah, illegals. Okay. Huh? Dependent. What are some words that maybe, if you're on the other side of the fence? People? Huh? Families, children. Okay. What about the issue of this one I always like to use because I'm old and I can remember this. So think of the issue of abortion, okay? So that's a nice topic, simple topic that we can all talk about, right? But I remember when I was probably early college, this would have been the late 60s, early 70s. The feminist movement, I was, just so you know, I was very involved in that. And we would use abortion rights. Do you remember that? Some of you that are kind of my age? Abortion rights was kind of how we started out, right? So as that kind of unfolded, what did people who were not real happy about that, what word did they use to describe it? Huh? No, but what did they use to describe their position?
Right to life.
Pro-life, right to life, right? And that got a lot of traction, didn't it? I mean, I got to be careful here. I'm going to show my, okay. So then what did the other side do to kind of counter that frame? Pro-choice, right? So we do this all the time, don't we? With language, images, we frame an issue. And what happens sometimes then is, you know, we lose sight of what the truth is, don't we? The frame becomes so important, okay? Sometimes we don't even notice the frame. Our message gets drawn right to the message. And frames can be so strongly held together that many of us mistake them for reality or for the truth. So when you see on my slide, "There but for the grace of God," how would you describe how disability is framed using that image? Pity, okay. Us versus them, right? How is disability viewed when you say "there but for the grace of God"? Pity is a good one. So what do you think about it? sorry, right? Because why? Because it's what? It's inferior, right? It's abnormal, isn't it? It's a misfortune. It's tragic, okay? It's an error. It's a mistake, okay? It's a failing. That is what that represents to many of us, there but for the grace of God, okay? So then it becomes this issue of overcoming, right? We must overcome, and we must overcome with cure or correction. Because why? Because able bodies are what? Superior, okay? Able bodies are superior. So what, can you imagine what we refer to that as? It's another ism. Ableism, okay? The superiority of able bodies is what the scholars would like us to consider, okay?